This has been a very damaging start. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, with him specifically the leader, have been hulled below the waterline?
No, I don't. I'm sorry that Tom is going. I regret that. But as you say, he made it clear it's for personal reasons. John Woodcock, Ian Austin, I know, and actually I've worked with both of them before they were MPs. And I'm sorry that they're not with us either. But I think the challenges that are ahead for the country are clear for everybody. I think there is a desperate need after 10 years of Tory austerity for public investment, the kind of things that John McDonnell was talking about yesterday. I welcome the announcements about improved workers' rights as well. And I think those are the themes that are going to be the important ones in the next few weeks.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, a lot of this stuff becomes quite sort of media Westminster bubble stuff, often talking about people who perhaps many of us will know well, but aren't perhaps household names. But people often may be more likely to turn their attention to things that actually affect them. So let's talk about some of those. Of course, this Dawn Butler, the Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, today is unveiling a series of reforms, they say, to transform the workplace for women. Dawn Butler called it a step change in how women are treated at work, and that includes a new workers' protection agency working in partnership with the HMRC, with powers to fine organisations that fail to report their gender pay. Also increasing statutory maternity pay. You've got maternity leave for up to 12 months, but maternity pay currently only 9 months. That's going to go up to 12 months for all parents, not just mums as well, to spend a full year with their newborns. And also giving all workers the right to choose working hours that suit them from day one of the job. Now, a lot of people will be quite keen on things like the maternity pay deal. I mean, of course, it's still not enough for people to live on. Most people, it's only just over £100. But giving all workers the right to choose their working hours, how would that work in practice?
Well, we introduced in government, actually, flexibility in this area, and there were, at the time, fears about what that might do. In fact, I think it's worked pretty well. And it always is down to Labour governments to improve workers' rights. And that's how we make progress. And I think that the steps that Dawn's announced are welcome steps in the right direction. There'll no doubt need to be consultation, discussion, and so on. But they're the right things to be doing. And I think it's very important that we do use the opportunity of a change of government to improve workers' rights.
Well, yeah, look, there's one thing about improving workers' rights, and there's also, tackling sexual harassment in the workplace, something she's talked about before also. A menopause workplace policy might be interesting to women of 51 like myself. But I'm not entirely sure. I'm not an employer, but I know an awful lot of people who are. I'm not entirely sure how you can have a situation where workers get to choose their working hours that suit them. And if you are, for instance, many years ago, I worked as a waitress. What if I said, well, I think I'd like to work between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. I don't want to work during lunch hours and during dinner hours. That's simply not going to work. I mean, what if I said, I'm going to do the breakfast show, but I'm going to start at 11 a.m. How can I possibly have the right to do that? It's one thing to have the right to request it and for it to be seriously considered if you need to have flexible working, and a good reason to be given if you can't. But if workers basically get to choose their hours, they're bosses rather than workers, aren't they?
Clearly, employers will set out what they need, and as you say, what we did in government was to introduce the right to request flexibility.
That's very different, isn't it?
It is different, and it worked extremely well. And there were lots of fears at the time about what the consequences of that would be. It's actually worked out fine. So I think it is right now to look at taking a further step, as Dawn is proposing today.
But do you genuinely think that will work? I can't understand
sure,
on what basis we all just get to go. I mean, people working factories, they're saying, well, these are the hours I'm going to work. How could that possibly work in practice?
I don't think that is the proposal Dawn is making. I think
it says give all workers. I'm reading the press release. Give all workers the right to choose working hours that suit them from day one of the job. I don't know what else that could mean.
I think that is an extension of the right to request flexibility, which
That's
as I say,
different, though.
when that was
Requesting
introduced-
it,
when
the
that-
right
when that
to
was- when that
request
was
it and the
introduced,
right
there
to
were lots
choose
of
it are different
concerns
things.
about that. Yes, I mean, clearly, their employers have requirements, and they will set out what they are, and people will have to meet the employer's requirements. But I think we can build on the progress that the last Labour government made, introducing the right to request flexibility, which has worked well. And now it's time to take another step forward.
All right. I mean, there have got to be lots of policy announcements over the next few weeks. 5 weeks to go still till we find out the results of the election. Obviously, the Conservative Party very keen, and indeed the Liberal Democrats, because of their stance on Brexit, very keen to make this the Brexit election. Your party very keen to make it not the Brexit election, and being very much accused of sitting on the fence on that issue. Your party leader has been accused of dodging questions again and again by when he's in press conferences, taking questions in threes and fours, and then being able to just sort of glide over questions about, for instance, Labour's future immigration policy in the event that we have a Labour government, and whether or not there is a Brexit deal under Labour, or indeed remaining under Labour, depending on the outcome of that referendum that's been promised, and also issues about a customs union, and whether or not there would be ability to negotiate a free trade agreement while in a customs union with the EU. Is it the case that really your party leader and your party, you are trying to dodge questions on what many people would regard as the key issue at this election, trying to divert attention when actually we still need to resolve the Brexit issue, and your party leaders avoiding answering those questions?
No, I think we've got an excellent policy on Brexit now, which is that the decision needs to go back to the people. We've got a proposal that in fact, we had two deals which have been negotiated, one by Theresa May, which Parliament has rejected, one from Boris Johnson, which got through its first stage in Parliament, but Boris Johnson didn't want any scrutiny of it in Parliament and insisted that we had an election instead. And I regret that. I think that deal should have been properly scrutinised in Parliament. Our policy is that once there's a deal, it needs to go back to the people, and the people need to have the choice. Do we want to leave the EU on the basis that's being proposed, or now we know the details, do we want to remain? And, on the one hand, you've got the Lib Dems saying simply cancel Brexit, forget about the referendum. On the other, you've got the Tories saying we want to go headlong in the direction that Boris Johnson's deal sets out. We're saying, no, the decision needs to go back to the people, and I think that is absolutely the right position to be taking.
How do you think the party is going to actually get this election campaign back on track? Because there hasn't been much sign of it so far.
I think once the dust has settled over all of this, we shall actually get onto the front foot in terms of policies properly, because that's what the election's about. The public, of course, enjoy tittle-tattle, but by the same token, and politicians do have a tendency to suffer foot-in-mouth disease, and I'm probably no exception myself. But that said, this is about two big issues: who runs the country and how we take the country forward. And that's really what the next 5 weeks is going to be about. It's not going to be about people who've made idiotic gaffes.
Well, again, and a lot of these gaffes, to be fair, on both sides, unless it's a big name politician, a household name, often this stuff is only really noted by the Westminster bubble. However, it does seem also that there's been very little conversation about Brexit so far. Now, if this is the Brexit election, this is Boris Johnson, you've got to, vote for me to give me a majority to get Brexit done so we can move on and then talk about the NHS, schools, police or whatever. There's very little conversation about Brexit. There's a very big risk with the Conservative Party, isn't there, that we're on very much Labour territory, where you're offering to spend big amounts of cash. There's been a right old sort of splurge and a grabbing from money from the magic money tree in the last week. Labour are offering to spend far more. So why should someone who's concerned about spending on public services vote Tory rather than Labour?
Well, I'm happy to say I couldn't disagree with you more. I think the big issues that people are actually concerned about, health service, social services, education, funding for the police, funding for the armed forces, are what this election ought to be about. Boris has said over and over again, get Brexit done. Well, he's in danger if he goes too far down that road of being strong and stable. And what we have to do I think, is to get on the front foot on the big issues. We are leading on the health service. People do actually trust the Conservatives more on the health service than they do on the Labour Party. That not maybe saying much, but nevertheless, that is a fact. If you look at all the polls, I think we have strong messages to take out on education, which will come up, on social care, which will come up, on the armed forces, on the police, on all the other issues that really matter in people's everyday lives.
And a lot of questions being raised there about how Labour Party as well, about how the Tory Party are going to pay for a lot of this. All this fiscal responsibility seems to have gone out the window, with spending pledges now from the Conservatives matching those of the 2017 Labour manifesto pretty much. And at that time, there was lots of criticism from your side that Labour Party was spending without any ability to pay for it. And that was going to cause, borrowing to go up and taxes in the future to go up. And it was all uncosted. But you're now being accused of doing exactly the same thing.
The key phrase in what you've just said is without the ability to pay for it. Since 2010, yes, we've had austerity. Yes, we've had to get the country's finances back on track. Yes, it has been hard for every single man, woman and child in the country because the previous government, Labour government, left us bankrupt. We've done that. We've taken it forward. We now have an economy that is one of the strongest in Europe. We can afford to do some of the things that people want done and that we want to do. The danger with a Labour government, potential Labour government, a Corbyn government particularly, is that they will be spendthrift, that they're announcing massive spending plans to the level where actually it would be virtually impossible to spend the money intelligently in the time that they say they're going to do it, never mind how much money.
And this is what the Institute for Fiscal Studies has been suggesting as well. But in terms of moving the election campaign on and getting it about the issues that the voters care about, and again, one of the big issues people are saying they want Brexit over and done with. Now, whether that's they want it over and done with as in they don't want it to happen at all, or they want to get it over and done with so it happens and then we move on. How do you do that when we're going to spend the next 5 weeks arguing about Labour policy, Lib Dem policy, Brexit policy and Tory policy? How are we actually going to move on from that?
Well, there will be life after Brexit. I hate to say it, but we do have to get Brexit done. You prowl the corridors of Westminster as I have done. You know perfectly well that it's not only the public. Politicians are fed up to the back teeth with Brexit. Why? Because it's a millstone around all our necks. We've got to get the deal done and through and move forward. And do remember that this Brexit deal, or withdrawal agreement, is only the beginning of the discussions. People tend to think, once we've done that, that's it. It isn't. It's the start of a big conversation with Europe about our relationship with Europe and about our trading arrangements with Europe, as well as our trading arrangements with the rest of the world. There's an enormous amount of work that we've got to do. But for the last several months, people like me have been tearing our hair because we want to get on and do other things. I chaired an agriculture bill months ago. It hasn't even gone through its stages. Why? Because we've been bogged down in Brexit.
Can I also ask you about something that Boris Johnson has said on the campaign trail? He's speaking at a Northern Ireland Conservatives event, and he said there will not be duties, paperwork or any form filling on goods produced in Northern Ireland going east to Great Britain. And he was absolutely reassuring on that. There's a video of him saying that. And yet that is simply not the case. The deal that has been negotiated by Boris Johnson, there was lots of discussion about this some time ago when ministers had to concede that there would be what they called export processes under the deal that has been negotiated by Boris Johnson. Does Boris Johnson going around not either lying about what his deal involves, or does he just not know what his deal involves? We always heard that he didn't do detail.
I am not going to try and pretend that Boris Johnson's deal is perfect. It isn't, any more than Theresa May's deal was perfect. It wasn't. Boris's deal is different. Theresa's deal had flaws in it. The backstop was one. Boris's deal has flaws in it. The line down the Irish Sea is one. But when you look at what we've got to do, if it's the best deal on offer, and if it's the thing that's stopping us from getting on and doing all the things that need to be done in the interests of people's everyday lives and our economy and our security and everything else, then we have to get the deal done and move forward.
But the issue there is that the Prime Minister, the man who apparently negotiated this deal, doesn't actually know the details of his own deal, or he's lying about the details of his deal. Which do you think it is?
Well, all I can say to you is I spent a happy several hours in the middle of the night going through the deal myself with a cold towel around my head, and I couldn't understand it either, and I doubt whether you could.
I admire the honesty, at least. So funny politicians that honest. Conservatives haven't had a good time. They lost a cabinet minister, unprecedented, at the beginning of a general election time. Apologies from Jacob Rees-Mogg for comments he made about the Grenfell Tower victims. It's all lots of battles with cabinet secretaries and the like. But of course, Labour had the resignation of Tom Watson as your deputy leader, and 2 former Labour MPs, as now actually I think up to 4, including Ian Austin, who we spoke to yesterday, telling Labour voters that they should vote for Boris Johnson because they believe that Jeremy Corbyn is unfit for public office. Is there any part of you that agrees with those criticisms?
No, there isn't. I mean, I'm really deeply disappointed. I'm not saying I don't understand that they've been making these comments in private and now want to go public. But, you know, someone like Ian Austin, who has been man and boy, the other way around, boy and man in the Labour Party, to have that view is deeply sad. I think he's wrong in what he said. I think that he's right in one sense. There are only 2 people, I'm afraid I don't put Joe Swinson in this, there are only 2 people who could be Prime Minister after the election. I think that bit of what he says is right. Where I disagree with him is to be able to trust the person he's now saying we should vote for, which is Boris Johnson. I find him a very untrustworthy, deeply flawed character. So I'm very surprised and disappointed by what Ian has said.
Well, let's talk about one of the policy announcements coming out today from the Labour Party. This is from Labour's Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, Dawn Butler, and this is unveiling a series of reforms to transform the workplace for women. Apparently, we've got it terribly bad. She's called it a step change in how women are treated at work. She wants a new workers' protection agency, finding organisations so they don't report their gender pay gaps, an increase from 9 months statutory maternity pay up to 12 months, requiring large employers to introduce a menopause workplace policy, tackling sexual harassment in the workplace, but also giving all workers the right to choose their working hours that suit them from day one in the job. How do you think that's going to work, Dianne?
Well, bits of it, I think, of the package you've just been through, I think bits of it are very easy to work. I mean, I think the pay gap that we've all gone on about for years, you know, there is no excuse for not making progress on that. So I think
progress has been made on that. There's no evidence
not
of a
lot.
There's
not
no
a lot.
evidence of a pay gap between women and men doing the same job.
No, the women and men doing that's what we're talking about, Jane, the pay gap. I'm not talking about where they're not doing the same job. Is still a long way. I mean,
no, it's not.
Baroness
Hayter, it's not.
Look at the BBC. I think Talk Radio may have a much better record, but we know with BBC, even where people are doing the same job, there's the pay gap.
But there's no. But at the BBC, we're talking about, and there's an ongoing employment tribunal. We're talking about people who are stars and recognisable names, doing well-known shows, and people who aren't stars, who aren't recognisable names or faces, doing little-known shows, not being paid the same. That's not the same job.
We know it's more than that, but also there is the issue of why does certain gender, why does one gender over the other get more progress? So, but to answer your question, I want to come on to what, I think what are the difficult ones in the package. I think about giving women real opportunities for promotion, for support, and then equal pay when they get in the job is an easy one to do, if you like. It's an easy win that I think if we put our shoulders to the wheel, we can do. And I also think that the extending of maternity leave, I mean, to some extent, getting someone to cover for maternity leave for 9 months is actually quite hard. I think it's easier for a year. So I think there are some things in the package that are easy and honestly, with a bit of goodwill, could be done. I think the one you raised, which would need much more thought, is what exactly does it mean about every person being able to work the hours that suit them?
The headline, I mean, again, it's not a headline chosen by newspapers. I'm talking about the actual press release. I've had this all this week, an actual press release from the Labour Party giving this statement, and then the explanation doesn't seem to tally at all. So which is it?
Well, my understanding is that it is going to be that what we want to do is encourage employers as much as anything else to think about, do we just automatically assume that everyone has to work 5 days let's look much more creatively at whether that's possible.
But that's not the same as giving all workers the right to choose working hours that suit them from day one of the job. That's what the press release says.
I think it should give. I think what is right is to give everyone the ability to think about that and talk about it.
But they already have that. You already have the right to ask.
Not necessarily for the onus to be on. The employer can say, "I'm not even going to consider it," and it may only be a small change. But I think the important thing about this package, because particularly about women. When I started work, most women were still giving up work altogether when they had children. That isn't the case anymore, and fathers also want to be more involved with their children. So I think this is about, if you like, nudging or encouraging employers to try and think much more creatively, so that people can be parents or indeed carers for older people and work. So I think what it's trying to do is say, let's stop always thinking it's a 5-day a week for everybody, always in the same hours.
Let's also go back to the increasing statutory maternity pay from 9 months entitlement to 12 months entitlement. You're actually allowed to be off work for 12 months and have your job kept open for you, but you don't get paid anything for the last 3 months. Most people can't survive on statutory maternity pay anyway. It doesn't cover, it doesn't cover most people's rent or mortgage, let alone all the other costs, unless you're getting some other, either you've got savings or you're getting some other extra grandparents or extra maternity pay from the company or the body that employs you. The reality is, upping it to 12 months probably isn't going to make a difference. Most women end up going back to work after about 6 months because they simply can't afford to be off work any longer. So why is an extra 3 months statutory maternity pay going to make any difference?
Well, I think again, it's sometimes it's better for the employer. I think that a year is easier to also to backfill the job, if you like. But I think really it's a recognition of the demands on young parents, or parents of young children, I should say, of trying to combine the two. And what we're trying to do, I think, is much more reach out to all women, saying, look, just because you're choosing to have your family at the moment, this doesn't mean you have to turn away for a long-term career. Most of us are going to be working for 40 years. So actually, a few more months to look after your young children is a pretty healthy way of encouraging women to think of themselves both as mothers and as having a career. So
this is going to be a key part of your campaign to protect the NHS in Scotland from a future trade deal or indeed from a future NHS privatisation.
That's correct. So our campaign launch in Edinburgh today, the centrepiece of that will be the announcement that we're bringing forward an NHS protection bill that will explicitly prevent any UK government signing an agreement that made the NHS anywhere in the UK, actually not just in Scotland, a bargaining chip in trade deals.
Even though both the Prime Minister and the American President Donald Trump have said categorically after Donald Trump, he was asked, Theresa May was Prime Minister at the time, and there was a press conference.
Theresa May was the Prime Minister,
and she was asked, and Donald Trump was asked alongside her, what would the NHS be on the table? And he said yes, everything was on the table. And then within hours, he'd said that the NHS would not be a part of it. Why do you still think it is going to be basically handed over in a trade deal?
Well, I think, from what we've seen from Boris Johnson, he is not a man who is trusted by the people of Scotland, not somebody who's trusted by voters across the UK. He is, making the NHS front and centre of his campaign over the last few days as well. But voters in Scotland, voters in the rest of the UK just simply do not trust the Tories with the NHS. With the SNP, on the other hand, we're standing up for the NHS. We're putting record amounts of money into it in Scotland, and across the UK, we want to ensure that it isn't privatised, it isn't sold off in any trade deal with Donald Trump.
There was quite an interesting poll recently that suggested actually that, not by very much, but certainly that the Conservatives were more trusted than Labour on the NHS.
Yeah, perhaps that's more a question put to Labour. That does suggest there's a sort of positive choice between the two leading contenders to be the Prime Minister in the UK. Here in Scotland, very different situation. Of course, people have the possibility to vote for the SNP, a party that really will stand up for the NHS. Okay. I say, with this bill, this proposed bill at the centre of our launch today, that shows what our priority is.
Okay, well, we know your top priority really is to get a second referendum referendum for independence. And to do that, you've been told that's not going to happen under a Tory government led by Boris Johnson. But it's possibility, not a priority in the first couple of years, but a possibility from Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. There's been lots of concerns raised by former Labour MPs, Ian Austin and John Woodcock yesterday. Basically came out with a big billboard saying to Labour voters, vote Boris. That Jeremy Corbyn is unfit for public office. We don't think that you should vote for him. Would you be willing, as the SNP, willing to work with Jeremy Corbyn if he got elected as Prime Minister?
I'm just going to go back to what you said about Boris ruling out granting the right for Scotland to have an independence vote in the future. I suppose Boris Johnson is in full campaign mode at the moment. And what he says, yesterday on a day trip to Scotland may be very, very different to what he says on the 13th of December.
Well, is it very different from, say, what Alex Salmond, the former SNP leader, said during the referendum campaign in September 2014, that it was a once-in-a-generation referendum?
Well, put it this way. We put in our manifesto in 2016 that if there was material change of circumstances, such as Scotland getting taken out of the EU against our will, then we would have the right to go to the country to ask people if they wanted Scotland to be an independent country once again. So it's not the SNP demanding and beating the drum for another independence referendum necessarily. It's what the people of Scotland voted for.
And this is because the argument for remaining in the UK was that you would remain in the EU, and now that has turned on its head.
It was a core part of it. It was a core part of Project Fear in 2014 in the throes of the independence campaign. But coming back to what was the main thrust of your question about Labour, where the SNP sits on where we end up in terms of numbers on the 13th of December, we're not going to go into formal coalitions. The First Minister's already said, talk of formal coalitions isn't the way we do things. We don't put Tory governments into power, so we certainly would be lending our support to the Tories. However, where there is space for a progressive coalition, we would look to work maybe in partnership, maybe in confidence and supply with other parties.
Which other? Look, there's only one other party realistically that you could do a confidence and supply deal with, and that would be the Labour Party. And what I'm asking you is, after people like Ian Austin and John Woodcock and other former Labour MPs have said that they don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn is a fit person for public office, a disgrace to his party, a disgrace to his country, is the billboard they stood in front of yesterday. You're calling, you would regard a government led by Jeremy Corbyn as a part of a progressive coalition?
Well, priority one for the SNP is campaigning to win the election in Scotland. Wherever the numbers lie come the 13th of December, we'll play the ball as it lies.
So you'll go into coalition. You have no issue with doing a deal with Jeremy Corbyn. Jo Swinson for the Liberal. Jo Swinson for the Liberal Democrats has said she has ruled out doing a deal with Boris Johnson, the Tories, and with Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party. Now, everyone's been picking up on this, the fact that actually she, without those two leaders in place, she could possibly be willing to go into some sort of deal with one of those parties. You're saying, not really bothered if it's Jeremy Corbyn or not. If we can get a second referendum out of it, we'll happily prop him up in government.
Well, I think I said it explicitly. We wouldn't be doing a formal coalition.
No, but prop him up in government.
Well, if there's a way for Scotland to obtain significant further transfer of powers, and to get a deal that's very much in Scotland's interest, then we would look to work with anybody against the Tories at the end of this election campaign. Yes.
Okay. And in terms of what sort of numbers you're hoping to get with the big launch of the SNP campaign today, what sort of territory? I mean, 35 SNP MPs at the current time, down, of course, from previous high. Are you hoping to get that mandate, as you believe you'll have, with its explicit promise to hold a second referendum and push for that if you do get the mandate? What sort of mandate do you think you'll need? What sort of numbers?
Look, we've already got a mandate. A good win for the SNP will absolutely hammer that home. The 35 was a great number of MPs to get returned in 2017, our second best ever result at a general election. But we are the incumbents or the challengers in every seat in Scotland, and we will be looking to do well in as many as possible.
Big announcement from the Conservatives today is, of course, this announcement regarding new visas and new sort of points-based system to attract doctors and nurses and other NHS workers to the NHS. Tell us how it's going to work.
Well, at the moment, of course, NHS, doctors and nurses can apply from around the world to work in the United Kingdom. We want to make it even easier than it is at the moment, precisely because we want to attract the brightest and the best into our country. So we are halving the fees that these applications will entice, so from £900 down to just over £450. We're going to speed the process up, and we want to make the point, that these people with these skills are very, very welcome in our country.
Well, there was a big concern, wasn't there, about introducing any sort of points-based system, or indeed the requirements on minimum salary would actually have a big detrimental effect on the NHS, although I think NHS workers are already excluded. They're already in a specific category where they can still be welcome to the country with specific skills, regardless of their income. Yes,
nurses are in that category because we recognise, we need more nurses, so we're very keen to encourage them from across the world.
Look, there'll be a lot of people who will welcome this and just say, look, it is sensible, and the Leave vote wasn't about shutting doors. It was about having controlled immigration. Lots of people talked about a points-based system, Australian-style points-based system for attracting the people who would benefit the British economy coming here. But there'll be also a lot of people who'll say, well, why do we need to import so many people to work in our NHS? We're constantly told we should be very, very grateful for all of the people who've come from abroad to work in our health service and how it would collapse without them. But no other European Union country relies on foreign workers as much as ours does. We have far, far, far higher percentage. Why do we need to rely uniquely on so many foreign workers when, say, Germany, France and other countries don't?
Well, Julia, you make a very good point, and I'm really, really keen to emphasise that, of course, this runs alongside our expansion of training for doctors and nurses. I mean, I'm delighted that in my own county of Lincolnshire, we're just opening up a new medical school to train more medical workers in our county. So it's very much part of that approach to make sure that we have a workforce that reflects the growing needs of the NHS. We all know we're living longer, we're getting better as well at treating some very, very serious conditions that perhaps 5 years ago, 10 years ago we would not have had the success rate that the medical profession now does. So this all means that we need people to help us deliver a really first-class NHS, and I'm delighted that this is one way of a much bigger package that we're going to be able to deliver this.
But isn't one of the problems that you've got in this election is after 9 years in power, admittedly under 3 different prime ministers, a lot of the things that you're offering the voters are simply repairing the damage already done. Some would say, okay, times of austerity, but there was a big political debate about that in the early 2010s, in the teens, because you want to have more NHS workers and improve the. We've got massive staff shortages in the NHS, and a lot of that was down to a limit on the number of nurses who could train, and the cost of nurse training going up for individuals, a requirement that they be graduates, and issues with doctors and their ability to apply in this country. With police officers, getting rid of 23,000 police officers and then saying, oh, well, now we're going to have to recruit 20,000 more. Schools budgets went down, now we're improving school budgets. An awful lot of what you're offering voters this time around, a lot of people would say, is you're just mending the problems that you've already created.
Well, looking back, of course, we know that we inherited an awful economic mess in 2010, and we've all had to take some very difficult decisions to mend that. But just to give you an idea of the progress we've made, back in 2010, we were borrowing, in terms of government spend, we were borrowing £1 in every £4 we spent, whereas now we've vastly improved that, so we're borrowing £1 in every £33 we spend, which means that the Chancellor, as he announced yesterday, we're in a position where we can make some really bold proposals for the future of our country, because next year, if we deliver a Conservative majority government, we want next year to be about our vision for the future of this country, about our people, about the wealth and prosperity of our country, not about fights in Parliament, not about about the negativity that seems to come from Labour and other parties. We don't want to make it about 2 referendums, for example. We don't want a repeat of this year's delays and confusion. We want to get this stage of Brexit done so that we can start really focusing on all these issues that are so important to us. And the way that we're going to be able to pay for many of these proposals is by having a sensible Prime Minister, sensible Chancellor with their hands on the tiller directing our economy.
Okay, and there was also been an announcement previously about extra money for, and under the remit that you have for safeguarding and vulnerability as Home Office Minister, extra money for rape and sexual abuse victims. Yeah. This comes after a Conservative candidate, Nick Conrad, was forced to stand down. He's apologised 5 years ago when he originally made some comments about women and rape. This was during a live debate about the footballer Ched Evans when discussing the star who was jailed for rape and then cleared 4 years later, and which he made some comments about women who don't want to give out the wrong signals. He said it's best probably to keep your knickers on and not get into bed with him. What did you make of his comments?
Well, I think he's taken the right decision to stand down. Look, the concept of consent...
What did you make of his comments,
though? The concept of consent is not complicated. It's either yes or no. It's that binary. And as Minister for Women, and also as the Minister who's overseeing a review of the criminal justice system, because we are concerned, very concerned, at the plummeting convictions of rape, and we want to see where victims and complainants are having problems, where they don't feel able to go forward with their cases. We want to see what more we can do to improve that. So I'm very clear. His comments, I did not, as the Prime Minister himself said yesterday, they were unacceptable. And I think we all have to acknowledge that, it may be that radio DJs can have conversations and make points in that capacity, but if you're standing for public office, you are rightly held to a higher standard.
What is that higher standard? I'm trying to work out what exactly was unacceptable. He wasn't, if you listen to the entire conversation that he had on it, he wasn't in any way saying it was okay for men to rape women. He wasn't justifying it in any way whatsoever. He was also, he was talking about women need to be aware of men's sexual desire, and at the point when you are actually in bed naked with a man, and at that point when you change your mind, as women are legally and morally entitled to do, that sometimes things might still happen and it would be wrong. At no point did he say it was justified. At no point did he say it was okay. But he said it's best probably to keep your knickers on and not get into bed with him. That's the sort of advice I'm planning to give to my daughter when she's a bit older, as a responsible mother. Wouldn't that be advice you'd give to a young woman, that as a general rule, no one's excusing rape in any circumstance whatsoever, but as a general rule, probably best not to get into bed naked with a man you're not planning to have sex with?
I think I obviously
is that not good advice? That was what he
Julia,
said.
I don't want to tell you what you should or shouldn't say to your daughter. First of all, I think the advice should be to both girls and boys, because the emphasis should not just be on girls having to make their views explicit. Boys also, I think, need to understand what consent looks like, what consent in a happy or loving or healthy relationship looks like. And I think, it's pretty clear, as I keep coming back, it's actually pretty clear. It's either yes or no. And I'm very concerned, I have to say, at the idea that
he wasn't justifying. Your candidate now stood down, Nick Conrad. He was not justifying rape or condoning it or in any way?
No, I have not accused him of that. What I'm saying
why has he had to stand down then?
What I'm saying is that the way in which, some of the wording he used about men's energy, I'm afraid I found that, it's not what I talk about.
Is it untrue, though, what he said?
If a woman says no, she says no.
He wasn't disputing that.
If a woman says no, she says no.
And when did he dispute that?
It's the issue of consent.
He didn't dispute that.
From his comments, he appeared to be saying that, and I'm not going to use.
He was talking about women protecting themselves from men who would continue to act once they'd been aroused.
If a woman wants to say no at any point, then that is her absolute right.
And he did not dispute that.
About consent here.
And he didn't dispute that. I'm going to keep saying it to you. He did not. Have you read? Read his
that's
comments
not
in full,
how
Vicky?
I read his comments, Julia, and it rather underlines, doesn't it, that this debate is that actually it's best to keep it simple and just say that if a woman, or indeed a man, because we obviously tend to focus on women as victims of rape, but men can be victims of rape as well. If someone in that relationship, in that situation, doesn't want to go further, then that is their absolute right.
And at no point did he ever question that.
No matter how excited the other person may be, the person who says no, that is their absolute right and should be respected.
And at no point did he suggest anything otherwise, and yet he's forced to stand down as a candidate.
Well, I'm grateful that we're having this debate about consent. You know, in the 21st century, the fact that we recognise that young men and women, that we need to have this conversation about consent, what it looks like, what healthy consent looks like, what in a loving relationship or in a relationship of
between loving people.
Between loving people. This is going to be one of those interviews, I suspect, that I'll look back on with great amusement.
Well,
but I just think we've got to talk about consent.
We are in cancel culture. We're in a point where no one can say anything about any topic whatsoever that isn't completely politically correct. He was saying something that I think a lot of people in homes, in workplaces and in pubs up and down the country will be thinking. They're not blaming a woman. They're not saying the man's okay. They're not in any way condoning rape. It's a disgusting, vile crime. At any point, a woman can legally and morally say, I don't want to continue, stop, and the man should stop. No one's disputing that, who's right-minded. He's simply pointing out that women would be safer if they did not take their knickers off and get into bed with a man they plan not to have sex with.
I don't think it's politically correct to have this discussion, Julia.
Okay.
Sorry. I think consent is really easy. It's yes or no. It comes back to that again.
So much focus has been on the two major parties, Labour and Tories, in the last few days, with both good news and bad news for them, given some of what's been going on. But, of course, there's been a lot of tension the week earlier on your party, and a lot of concerns from Leave voters across the different political divides, worried that the Leave vote is going to be split. We're going to have yet another hung parliament full of Remain MPs who are not going to put any version of Brexit through, either Boris Johnson's deal or any no-deal Brexit. Are you backing Nigel Farage, your party leader? Some others, we've seen some candidates for MPs have stood down saying they're happy with the Boris campaign, the Boris bill. They don't want to undermine the chances of a Tory majority. But are you happy to back Nigel Farage on standing up to 600 candidates?
Yes, I'm 100% behind Nigel for the simple reason that in places like Ashfield, where I am right now, the most popular choice on the doorstep is for a clean Brexit.
Can we not talk about any individual constituency, because obviously that creates difficulties. We've got lots of other candidates. Obviously, you're not a candidate yourself, but there'll be candidates from all the main parties standing in the seats. Well, there's been a lot of talk, wasn't it, that the Brexit Party could effectively take some Conservative votes. I know your party say you'll take some Labour votes too, but you could end up splitting that vote. It happened in the Brecon by-election. The combined Tory and Brexit Party vote would have defeated the ultimately winning Liberal Democrat candidate. Aren't you at risk of doing that again?
I think it's important to point out here that this is basically Project Fear Mark II. This idea that voting for Brexit is voting for Corbyn is absolutely ludicrous, because let's be clear, we have a very clear position on Brexit, and that is we are the only party now that is supporting a clean Brexit. The Tory treaty, Boris's treaty, is a form of Remain. It's a Remainers Brexit in our eye. When you look at the political declaration on easy things to understand, such as fishing and taxation policy, it is Brexit in name only. And we will be spending time making sure that voters understand that. As for places like Peterborough, for example, Mike Green, the candidate there, in terms of splitting the vote, was a clear favourite candidate to take that seat. And it was the Tories that split the vote there and got Corbyn into Peterborough. So this works two ways. Nigel has been resolutely clear and firm on his position that we are still open for conversations with Boris about doing a Leave alliance. We saw yesterday that our competitors are aligning to form a Remain alliance, and we believe that the best way of delivering the strongest Brexit for the electorate is by coming together. Now, that's still a conversation that's open. We have until November the 14th. Nigel was saying from Carlisle last night that this is still on the table. So the phone lines are very much open. We're happy to talk. This is not us being hostile towards the Tories. We can work together to smash Corbyn and to deliver Brexit. Let's do that.
Well, you say happy to talk, but Nigel Farage went out on the stage at that Brexit Party rally when he press conference when he said, you basically you have to tear up your own bill, your own treaty, the Boris deal, or we're going to stand 600 candidates. I think for a lot of people saying it was more of a threat rather than an invitation at that point. You know as well as I do, there is no circumstance in which the Conservative Party or Boris Johnson as Prime Minister is going to tear up the bill that he's just done a deal with. I keep saying bill, sorry, the deal that he's done with the EU 27. They've agreed it. He's agreed it with them. We even saw, I think, against a lot of people's expectations, a majority vote in Parliament for it on the second reading. In which case, why on earth would he throw that away now?
Well, because quite simply, when the detail comes out, because the devil is always in the detail of what this treaty actually entails, we believe that support will slip away for it. Because when you analyse it, it is clear, as I've said, on things like fishing and business and regulatory alignment and the level playing field, these things, it will tie us in. Now, Nigel has made a compromise since that earlier proposition. He said he is prepared to just do not extend the transition period into 2021, and let's talk about, going out on WTO terms at the end of that if we can't do a deal that's more preferable to Brexiteers and to Boris. So there is wiggle room here, and I think, the point is this. The electorate wants us to come together. 80% of Brexit Party voters want a Leave alliance. 71% of Conservative voters too do as well, but we have a disconnect with the Tory elite. Now, let's see how this pans out. What an unpredictable election we've seen already. Every day is chaos. And we are confident that when the detail starts coming out, we're going to start going up. We're going up 4% in one day this week. And, here is the evidence that people are not, especially in places like the Midlands and the North and Wales, where we are strong, people are not going to be easily swayed by Boris.
Well, okay,
this is not a rollover
But why
job.
have people like Lance Foreman or your fellow MEP said that he's happy with this? Another number of candidates have said 20 or so have dropped out. They've just said, look, we're not going to stand because we don't want to split the Leave vote. We're happy enough.
That's actually not true, Julia. So the candidates that dropped out have not dropped out because they have a widespread opposition to this deal. There are many other reasons that we haven't gone into yet,
okay.
such as them being personally abused and illness, the usual sort of churn. This is not 20 people standing down because of the deal. So I have to correct you on that. As far as other MEPs, they're entitled to their opinion. I don't agree with them. I'm 100% behind Nigel Farage and what we have on the table, and the vast majority of our people are too. That is what we're fighting for. We have a clear position, and we intend to deliver on that.
And if you wake up on December the 13th, day after the election, and we see that we are back in a hung parliament, the Brexit Party may or may not have won some seats or not, but the Conservative Party hasn't, and we see results again and again in some key seats which showed that the Brexit vote, the Leave vote, was split. How do you think you'll feel then?
Well, the point is this. If Boris's deal was the amazing treaty that he's having us believe, then people will vote for it, won't they? Except, they may not, because they may decide that a different alternative is preferable. That's democracy, Julia. The whole idea that people with different opinions should simply roll away, despite, Boris voting for Theresa May's deal at the third attempt, despite the ERG, the so-called Spartans, seeming to just roll over and toe the party line. Now, we, in a democratic institution, in a democratic and free country, you are allowed to have different points of view, and let the electorate decide.
Okay.
If there is a hung parliament, we would be happy to work with the Conservatives to, in the way that, say, the DUP have done, confidence and supply, to ensure that we are able to renegotiate this treaty to get back towards the Brexit that we believe the vast majority of the public want.
We are very much into the full throttle of the election campaign. It's interesting. Sky
full
News,
tilt.
yes, absolutely. Sky News just had a poll asking, which parties people thought had a good week, and they pretty much no one seemed to think that any of the parties had a good week so far. Certainly, Tories have had a bad week, Labour have had a bad week, and indeed, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. We've got a bit more time. We've got 3 Labour candidates in the last 12 hours have had to withdraw over comments they have made either online or in person. Some relating to anti-Semitism. That's 3 candidates. And again, we of course had the Tory candidate, Nick Conrad. We were discussing him a little bit earlier. He's also withdrawn. Today, Liberal Democrats leader Joe Swinson is making the case to Remain voters in Scotland today. Of course, they've already got a big Remain party to vote for, and then the SNP. Why would someone who wants to Remain vote for the Liberal Democrats as opposed to the SNP?
One very simple reason, actually, that we've had in recent years, as you know, 2 referendums in Scotland. We've had the referendum on Scottish independence and the referendum on leaving the European Union then. On both occasions, the Liberal Democrats in Scotland, if you only took into account the Scottish votes here, were on the winning side. That's we wanted Scotland to remain part of the United Kingdom, and we wanted the United Kingdom to remain part of the European Union. And the problem for the SNP as a Remain party in Scotland is that every time they say to people, this, of course, is about Brexit, vote for us because we're opposed to Brexit, because they know that was 62% of Scotland voted against Brexit. And then when the votes are counted and you've got the result, they say, there you are, that's proof that people want another independence referendum. So if you are a person who wants to show that you want to remain part of the European Union and you live in Scotland, then if you lend your vote to the SNP, then they will use that vote as an indication for support for Scottish independence or another referendum. As a Liberal Democrat, I would say to the people of Scotland, we were on your side on both of these occasions, and you can safely vote for us.
Well, what I don't understand is why you are campaigning for a second referendum for the EU referendum in 2016, although, of course, if you became a majority, your party leader has said that you would actually just revoke Article 50 without bothering to ask the people. You consider that a mandate.
I've told you the reasons for that before.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a feeling we'll go over an awful lot of this many times in the future, Alistair. But you're opposed to a second referendum in Scotland from their referendum in 2014 when they voted to remain in the United Kingdom. Why is it okay to have a second referendum on the EU, but not have a second referendum on Scottish independence?
Because on the EU, the question would be a different question from the one that was asked in 2014.
Will it? Are you taking Remain off the ballot paper then?
No, just let me finish explaining here, Julia. In 2014, people in Scotland voted Remain in relation to the United Kingdom. In 2016, the people of the United Kingdom as a whole voted Leave. As we've said before, we voted for a departure but not a destination. And when you have the destination, in our view, it's sensible and proper that people should be given the opportunity to vote on that destination. So it is a different question, whereas in Scotland you would be putting the same question about a departure for the second time. And I think that's an important difference.
Well, hold on a minute. That doesn't make any sense to me at all, because if it's about the destination rather than the departure, if the 2016 question was, are we going to leave or not? Well, that question's already been answered. Then it's a question of how we leave, in which case the referendum that you should want should be a referendum on, say, Boris Johnson's deal or the Labour Party policy, whatever deal they get, or leaving without a deal. But it should still, both of those should involve departure, surely.
Well, no, because the alternatives to these things have always got to be Remain. So
Why?
Remain should be on the ballot paper. Because if people are offered options that they didn't actually want when they voted to leave in 2016, then they should still be entitled to make that clear. I'm quite open to the idea that somehow or another, perhaps by asking more than one question in a referendum, you might have more than one departing or destination question. But if people do not like the options that they are being offered, then they should not be forced to leave or just to choose between things that they do not want. That's why Remain has to be on the ballot paper.